The Right Side with Doug Billings.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the set of my show, The Right Side. I'm Doug Billings. If you've watched this show for any length of time, I live in the state of Kansas. I was born and raised in Missouri. Missouri always has a soft spot and a tender spot in my heart. Cheers to the show me state. But for the last 33 years, I've lived in Kansas, and I'm happy to be here. Kansas used to be a solid red state, ladies and gentlemen, solidly red. But lately it's purple and tending towards blue. Certain counties, Johnson County, Kansas, among them, which is the Kansas City metro area on the Kansas side of that state line, has gone more and more blue in recent years, and we need to change that. The governor's office has been occupied for the last 8 years by a commune socialist. You know, the Democrat Party does not exist anymore. You all know that. You're aware of that, especially those of you who watch my show, because you're members now of the most intellectually mature audience in all of podcast land. But Laura Kelly is a raging radical liberal, and the liberal agenda has been, quite frankly, especially in the last few years, but since its inception, an anti-American agenda. Evidence of the obvious is sufficient. Look at what they've done. Look at the topics that we're talking about in this country. The founding fathers are rolling over in their graves, all 56 of them. To think that in Topeka, the capital city of the state of Kansas, there's going to be a black mass held. Absolutely ridiculous. And people, misguided people, think that they can chalk that off to free speech or freedom of religion. Wrong, ladies and gentlemen. The founding fathers had no intent whatsoever to allow for such an abhorrent demonstration, such an evil. They did not intend Satanism as a form of religion. They certainly didn't intend for people to occupy a state capitol and participate in a black satanic mass, which is on its surface an affront to all Catholics, myself included, and all Christians in general. Founding fathers had no intention of that. In fact, people who would have tried to put forth such an event during the founders' lifetime would have been executed, hung in the public square, or shot, or burned at the stake. It's not freedom of religion. Satanism is not a religion, ladies and gentlemen, and the founding fathers did not intend it. There are a lot of things that we have allowed to happen, not only in Kansas, but the Republic in general, that are not intended by the founding fathers. The liberal agenda of the LGBTQ kook movement, the things that we talk about in this, men in women's sports, people who believe in the absolute myth of gender misappropriation, and that children whose parents believe in that myth or who have been seduced into believing that myth themselves, the radical liberal agenda would dare suggest to our children that in order for them to be happy, they would have to mutilate their genitalia. Abhorrent, medieval, barbaric. And yet that is what we're forced to talk about and address precisely because of the radical liberal agenda in this country and in the state of Kansas. We need a governor who's not afraid to say these things out loud and who will stand up to the radical left, anti-American, anti-God agenda. And who's not afraid to use the executive pen. Illegal immigration. Every state is now a border state, thanks to Administrator Biden and the radical liberal no border policy. A governor needs to use the executive pen. In the state of Kansas, if there is not an active militia, we will create one. We should create one. The Constitution calls for the militia to be under the control of the governor. The National Guard should be used. The Kansas Constitution calls for, in times of insurrection or invasion, the governor has powers to direct the National Guard and the militia to control the invasion. That's what we're up against. We need to partner with Tom Homan, the border czar, round up the illegals and deport them, separate the violent criminals from the other illegals and document them accordingly. Illegal criminals out permanently. Other people who are otherwise good but have come here illegally still must go. Get back in line and come back in the right way. I don't care if it's grandma or Uncle Ben or Uncle Tom or Aunt Sarah. They worked at Quick Trip. They've worked at 7-Eleven. They got a job at my construction company. They're basically good people. Ladies and gentlemen, if they're here illegally, they need to go, and we need a governor who says that out loud and says it with conviction and passion and truth and honesty. We need a governor who goes to the cities and the counties of this state and meets people, shakes hands, and speaks from the heart instead of a prepared speech. We don't need medical geeks. We don't need rhinos who voted with Laura Kelly most of the time, but because they have name recognition, people seem to like them. We all need to rally around a MAGA conservative candidate for governor. I know that some people in the state of Kansas will say that, well, Doug, you supported Dennis Pyle, and that caused us to lose an election. Dennis Pyle, who was a Republican and switched to independent. No amount of votes would have saved the governor's race with Dennis Pyle in it. In fact, if you were to take the votes that you claim that Dennis Pyle got, those votes would not have been enough to put a Republican in the governor's mansion. Now, do I regret doing and supporting some of that? Some of it, yes. I wish that Dennis would have gone through the primary system. Would I support another candidate who doesn't go through the primary system? No, absolutely not. Will I support the Republican candidate who wins the primary? Absolutely so. The last time I checked, this is America, and we can still vote for whomever we want to. And maybe some people thought I made a mistake doing that with Dennis Pyle and so forth, but I like Dennis, and he's a true conservative. Now, Kansas, the governorship, a governor who's not afraid to use the executive pen with things that he can or she can control. Weed out the DEI and the wokeism, 100% gone. If any agency or organization within the purview and the control of the governorship in Kansas were left in my hands, for example, not anymore would they be DEI or woke. It would be gone by power of the executive pen. Where are the governors, the candidates? Where are they? Why aren't they speaking up? Where is someone who can look you in the eye and speak from the heart? Whether or not you agree with every single thing I say, at least I speak to you from the heart and without looking at a cue card, a teleprompter, or notes. We have got to begin to change the status quo in Kansas with regards to its color. We have got to engage countermeasures against the radical liberal agenda. How do we do that? Primarily by what I call determined prayer and determined patriotism. We all know what prayer is. We continue to pray and lift us up. We have had a great reawakening in the United States and in Kansas, but there's a lot of work to do. This great reawakening back to the divine providence of God and the intent of the founding fathers. Determined prayer. Let's promise to meet each other in prayer. Second, determined patriotism. That is the hard work of it all. That's canvassing neighborhoods. That's making sure that the voter rolls registrations are accurate. That's knocking on doors for your candidate. Showing up at events, running for school board. Even though no one in their right mind wants to go sit through a 3-hour school board meeting, we do it anyway because we have a concept of what it is to be determined in our patriotism. That's what Kansas needs. And hopefully a governor who's not from the elected class, someone who comes from outside of all of this, who's not part of the establishment. We need someone from outside to come in. The MAGA template has already been created for us. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Look what President Trump has done on a national scale, and let's do that on the scale within Kansas. My gosh, there's so much to be hopeful for. I know, that every day in America is a sunny day. Even when it's cloudy, the sun shines brighter because of what President Trump has been doing. I want that same feeling to be magnified within Kansas. We need a MAGA conservative governor in Kansas. And I think I've just outlined who that may be. What do you think, ladies and gentlemen? We're in this together. Believe it. For the Republic, for Kansas. Cheers.
The Right Side with Doug Billings.